Hi people, it's Sarkavist here, and today I'm going to be reviewing Death Stranding. I'm going to do my best to keep this spoiler free, however, there are certain things I've just got to talk about, otherwise I'm going to be paralysed into talking in incredibly generic terms, so I'm going to have to venture into some territories, but I'm not going to tell you like the big twists obviously, or some of the mysteries behind some of the characters, because if I did, I'd sort of ruin the point of playing this game. So there have been many questions around this game, and it's an incredibly polarising one as well, because when it comes down to the gameplay of Death Stranding, which, as I have said before, in a game is the most important thing, there's no getting away from that, it is a tad tedious, a little bit boring, because essentially what you do is you go to a station, you pick up some cargo, and then you carry it on your back while attempting not to fall over, and you can use various tools to traverse the environment, and sometimes you'll actually find some kind of a tool from another player that has left it there, and you can use that to traverse the environment as well. So it's about traversal and delivering packages, and there is a little bit of a gameplay twist in that if you want to take lots of cargo at once, it does make your character progressively harder to move. They'll be slower, more likely to topple left or right, so you do have to balance out what you're carrying. That said, those dynamics are not enough to keep the game interesting and fresh over the course of its entire run, even though you technically are continuing to unlock new things over and over again. You are constantly getting new pieces of equipment, upgrades of old equipment, new buildings you can create, new weapons even, but there's just so much walking in this game, and I'd say during the first third I could get into the rhythm, I could appreciate the atmosphere that the game was trying to give me, but I think it must have been about maybe the 2/3 mark where it was putting me through some deliveries where it was constantly making me backtrack over a snowy mountain, and I was just getting to the point where I did almost stop. I have to be real, like it was the backtracking I think which specifically made me dislike it, because it wasn't like going back and forth was presenting new challenges, it was just sending me back and forth, just going across this terrain which was pretty easy to traverse as well, so there wasn't any challenge, it was just me going back and forth on this 10-minute journey. And I remember to myself thinking that, look, this game has got so much potential in terms of its creativity, its narrative and its mysteries, that it's almost like a game that is trying to make you stop playing, but you keep going because you want to unravel this tale, the Death Stranding, what is it? And that is what got me through this game, because I'm only reviewing it because I finished it and I want to talk about it. I didn't start the game with the intention of doing the review. What got me through it was looking for answers. That's what compelled me to make those journeys, which again, quite frankly, were quite boring. And if we weren't in an age where, you know, it was easy to just have the game running and then have like a podcast or YouTube open on the right so that they could, you know, fill in that time, I can't say I would have gotten through this game. There's one journey that actually sends you pretty much across the course of the entire game, and I remember when it asked me to do it, like, are you being serious? Are you going to make me walk that long to get to the next part of the game? The only thing that saved it was that the game did something unusual at that point and actually mixed it up when you backtracked, made some challenges along the way and revealed story quite frequently. But again, I think it's not necessarily the walking precisely that did it for me, because I can see the interest and the nuance in how you get around the environment, trying to avoid the enemy AI as well. I did appreciate that. I think it's just when it made me backtrack that I started to lose it a bit, because I felt like I was just doing exactly the same thing, using the same pieces of equipment I left, and it felt like pure time wasting. And although there is a fast travel system in the game, you don't get it until a little bit into the game, and also when you use it you can't carry your cargo, and there are situations, well, most of the game are situations where you do actually need to carry cargo, so a lot of the time it isn't really an option. And obviously if fast travel was a massive option, everyone would use it because it would save so much time on the game. And I suppose it was hard sometimes for me to play it and think that they weren't just trying to artificially pad out the game's length. because it is a long game. I'll give it that. I feel like too many single-player experiences like this at the moment are just over in a flash, and I appreciated that it actually had some decent meat to the bones. But some of those hours that I spent weren't overly fulfilling. But let's talk about where the gameplay can be positive. First of all, no glitches or bugs as far as I could tell. Sam controls perfectly fine. Movement is fine other than when it intentionally is trying not to be. It felt responsive. In fact, for a 30 FPS game, it felt oddly responsive. I sometimes forgot it was a 30 FPS game, so that's great. And also, something that I did genuinely enjoy was when you had to get around the BTs, or in other words, the invisible ghosts. So, at some points in the game, there will be these invisible ghosts that want to get you, and you need to try and avoid them even though you can't see them while you're moving, but you do have a radar that flashes at them and tells you roughly where they are. If you get too close, you have to hold your breath, otherwise they notice you and then they'll come after you and attempt to eat you. And the process of being taken in by a BT is kind of weird, because it starts off where they're just floating. Then they start walking on the ground towards you. And then these oil tar monsters try to drag you under tar. And then you get sucked into another dimension where this giant tar monster will try and kill you. And there are buildings coming out of the tar. So it's super creative in terms of this. But I almost thought it was getting comical in terms of how many stages there are with the BTs. I also found it incredibly easy to actually avoid them. And I didn't actually get captured by a BT until there's a point in the game where you do need to be captured by a BT. So I didn't even know that's what it was. I thought it was just like an instant death until I had to actually encounter one on purpose. So I loved the design of the BT fights, but I thought once you've got the gist of it, they're super easy to avoid. There are so many parts during the encounter that you can use to get away from them. And eventually, when it starts giving you more and more tools, they just became like not even a threat anymore. But the way that the game sets them up in one of the earlier cutscenes, and this is one that's in a trailer, so I'm not spoiling anything here, but it shows you this super atmospheric scene where you're with some drivers and one of them gets taken in and eaten by a BT, and it's super freaky. And that cutscene sort of makes them out to be this massive threat that you want to avoid, but in reality, actually playing the game, they're not too tricky. But again, I love their design. I do like those gameplay segments, even if I think it's a bit simplistic. And I do appreciate the lore around them. Again, this game compels you primarily through the lore, which is why if you make a point before the game of figuring everything out and going online and looking up why is this person called this, who is this person, what's their relationship, if you find all those mysteries out, it will massively take away from the experience, because you won't have that same motivation to play the game and to get through those slightly boring segments to get to the cutscenes and to enjoy them. And I'll say this, the cutscenes are great. The cinematography is the standout though, not just the graphical fidelity, but the way the virtual camera is moved around the scene is just, that is the best part of the cutscenes in my opinion. It's the virtual cinematography that I liked. The dialogue is, well, I don't know, sometimes it over-explains itself. I think Kojima's like storytelling mechanism, and I noticed this in Metal Gear Solid 5 as well, is to initially throw some cutscene at you with not a lot of talking, and there'll be all this crazy mad stuff going on, and you say to yourself, what did I just watch? And then he will gradually, through other cutscenes, begin to explain through very heavy-handed exposition what exactly that was. And by the time you're at the end of the game, you're like, wow, I completely understand that cutscene now, but only because you sort of overly explained it to me. But I suppose maybe what he's doing there is giving you the opportunity to try and work things out. And I did appreciate the fact that certain twists in the game were kind of telegraphed, like they didn't come out of nowhere. I thought, I was right about that when I saw the mystery unfold, and I quite like that. In terms of the effort in the performances from the likes of Mads Mikkelsen and Norman Reedus, they are great. Like the body acting from the motion capture, the facial acting. Sometimes I can imagine them in their motion capture studio thinking, how do I actually do this scene? Because the dialogue is so wacky, but they always pull it off. They always take it completely seriously. And I think they are worth watching. Like, they're not a masterpiece, again, because the dialogue can just get a little bit disjointed and maybe not particularly natural. And there are some play on word jokes which I'm like, that's not, who's finding that funny? Like, I don't know how these play on word jokes come in. And all the characters have stupid names. Like, one of the characters is called Fragile because she's delivering things and she's a bit fragile. One's called Diehard, one's called Dead Man, and just like, I don't mind that sort of being like their nickname or their alias, but I wish we could refer to them by a normal name. And usually when they do have a normal name, it's something equally weird and crazy. So the names are a bit funky, and it's kind of disjointed because you're looking at this world which graphically is hyper convincing, but I swear this would work so much better as something like an anime, because it feels like I'm watching something which is told and delivered like an anime, but in this hyper realistic visual setting, and it's a bit crazy. It's like Kojima's his signature almost, because I remember thinking exactly the same thing in Metal Gear Solid 5. And I suppose on the whole, right, this game, I can't recommend it, and so many people say that because it can get so boring, but what I absolutely do recommend if you don't want to buy it is you must look at the cutscenes on YouTube or something and experience the story of it, because the story is not amazing or great or a masterpiece, but I will tell you this, guys, it is interesting. Even if some of the explanations are wacky as hell, they are interesting, it's different and it's unique. And on the whole, I'm very glad Death Stranding actually exists, because it's something very different. They took risks with this game, and a lot of people are frustrated that the reception, including I think to some extent Kojima himself, the reception in the West has been a little bit mixed. But the thing is, you can't do a risky game without pissing off some people and pleasing others. This is the result of taking a risk. You can't just take a risk and expect it to pay off entirely. Usually a risk is gonna, divide people. That's what happens. So when I look at the situation, I see some people hate the game, some who love it. I think, well, that's just what this game would do. This game would result in this kind of reception. How on earth can you do something so crazy and so out there and expect it to resonate with everyone? You can't. But I would recommend, if you can't buy the game, I'd recommend looking at the cutscenes on YouTube. Otherwise, if you think, because look, it wasn't a chore for me to get through the game, it just at certain points got tedious. I think it's a game worth trying. I think it's different, it's unique, it has some troubles in terms of the way it plays, but I think the cutscenes and the story are dead interesting. As always, people, thanks very much for watching and see you next time.